Welcome to the GraphGeeks podcast, where we explore the fascinating world of relationships and connected data. I'm your host, Amy Hodler, and today we're looking at a unique solution that leverages the power of graphs to help transform the way we use Earth data. That's the vast and growing data collected by satellites, drones, and other sources around the globe. First, let me introduce Jesse Kallman, founder and CEO of Dante, which is developing an AI-powered search engine for Earth observation data. They collaborate with the likes of U.S. Space Force and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Also from Dante, we have Anthony Heilich, head of their machine learning. Anthony started his career at IBM Research, then worked at Google Cloud AI, as well as in the Google AI Research, and also worked as an engineer lead at Meta. So just a little bit of ML background for Anthony. So anyhow, welcome, Jesse and Anthony.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us, Amy.
Yeah. So let's dive in, and I would say Earth data, really interesting topic that has far-reaching impact and ability to change things. Tell us just a little bit more about Dante itself and your roles there.
Sure. So it's great to be here. And so, yeah, the genesis for the company and what we're focused on, I think you mentioned Earth data. It's kind of interesting. We've kind of debated, what's the right word to use. And it's really anything tied to a physical location somewhere on the planet. And how we came to do what we're doing is that a lot of our team, myself and other folks on the team, have really worked in a lot of different industries, the satellite world, drone industry, but thinking also a lot of the analysis world, dealing with open source information, think news, social media content, just so much information being generated every single day, either visually or even conversationally talking about locations. Think every ship in the world broadcasting its location, every aircraft broadcasting its location. All of this is out there, and it's still the world of experts, right? It's still experts needing to understand how to use this information. What's the right information to answer a particular question? And what we wanted to do is leverage a lot of what was happening in the AI and graph domain more broadly in building relationships and helping tie a user's normal, natural question, right? Not an expert, someone that's just trying to get something answered, and tie that to this vast mix and matrix of information that's kind of being generated every day to help translate the world of all of this spatial information into what are the right strings and bits of information that matter for you, the user who's trying to ask a question. So that's kind of the origin and kind of the initial problem set we're going after. And we really wanted to tackle this from the approach of search. Again, being that amazing, really powerful step one in enabling these folks to leverage the content more powerfully.
Awesome. Anthony, did you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I can say that big data has been an area that I've been focused on since I finished graduate school, where you've just got so much volume and variety of data. And across industry, everybody's trying to figure out, how can I find the thing amongst all the other things? And how do you make sure that in this sense-making and decision-making process that you've got the relevant data and you're not distracted by data that is not relevant to the situation that you're in? And it fits, that experience fits very nicely with what we're trying to do at Dante, and making sure that those latent connectivity or connections between data are really pulled out when it may be non-obvious in a lot of sense, and understanding some of the latency and scale and relevance issues that we're tackling. Graph and connected data, knowledge graph just provides a great foundation for us to leverage to bring the product to bear.
Mm-hmm. So I love the term latent connections or latent insights. I think that has a lot of implication we can talk about later. But before we do that, Jesse, I'm wondering, what kind of problem did you notice that you went and said, hey, I have to solve this? Like, there's a problem out there and we just can't do it this way anymore. What did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, the problem that really led to this is myself and also our co-founder, Martise, we've been seeing this kind of, call it bottleneck situation happening in a lot of different industries. So think volume of information growing exponentially, but volume of skilled people that know about that information, know how to use it, know how to make sense of it, was not growing at anywhere near the same rate, leading to this huge bottleneck in the industry of people out there either, not aware of, these unknown unknowns of all these things that exist out there, or they are, but they just can't get to it. They don't know how to use it. And all of these requests funneling down into the experts. And what we figured was there must be a way that we can leverage technology in order to remove this bottleneck, allow a lot of the non-experts to be able to self-serve, again, ask questions, pull the content and get information synthesized in a way that matters for them, without always needing a highly skilled expert in every single case that you want to use or leverage any of this information. So maybe to give some specifics, like in some of my past roles, I've worked with very, very large insurance companies, for example, during natural disasters. And it's one of the most common use cases in the geospatial world, the spatial, like just general broader spatial information, location intelligence world. And you think about organizations as large as a State Farm or as small as a retail insurance agent. And during some of these large natural disasters, in a prior role, I'd be getting phone calls from people just understanding, like, is my house still there, right? Not knowing that there are airborne sensors collecting that entire location every day. There's satellites taking pictures. People are posting videos on social media. Like, all of that information is there. It's public and it's on the internet. And, we felt like there must be a better way for, again, no matter who you are or what your background is, to be able to have the power of all of this information at your fingertips in the same style of experience that you have with, Google searching across the general web and websites has to exist in this sort of domain.
Is it fair to say that you're trying to make this Earth data, are you trying to make that as easy to search as it is to do a regular Google search? Is that kind of an accurate way to portray that?
Yeah, I mean, inside the company, like, the goal has always been to make it as simple where you could go to, another great story, like a lot of the folks that we work with, they've worked in these industries for 10 or 15 years, but they've never, for example, their parents have never been able to see, for example, the things that they work on. Because one, their parents just either are not experienced or aren't familiar with the technology, or it's some classified government program, or for whatever the reason. And we've always intended this to be something where you could be casually, hanging out with your family over Thanksgiving dinner or something like that, spin your computer around, and now someone is doing, highly complex signals intelligence queries, not knowing it, but all they're doing is asking the location of their favorite cruise ship somewhere in the world, right? And what they don't know is that we're picking up an AIS feed off of a ship that's bouncing off a satellite, hitting a database, that we're interrogating an API, locating that information and correlating it to the right class of information based on the question. But to them, they just figured out in 1 second where their favorite cruise ship is in the world, right? And so we try to think about it in that context of how do you make it so that anyone in your family or your circle of friends, right? It doesn't need to be someone that's been doing this for 15 years, because even the people in industry, right? In these industries, the folks that know, like, the volume of people that know how to use this like it's second nature is still very, very tiny. And so that's kind of how we thought about it.
I like that as a very relatable use case, but I also could tell this has pretty significant, important uses that are, health, livelihood, security uses as well. You can, because obviously that's important. I heard that you met with the National Space Council at the White House earlier this year, some indication of how important this is. Is there anything about that you can share with the listeners?
Sure. I mean, I think that meeting and a lot of other government meetings, I think even beyond us, the availability of this information to use across the government, civil agencies, defense organizations, intelligence agencies, the U.S. is investing billions of dollars in new sensors, new technologies, new analytic systems. I mentioned that natural disaster response earlier, right? Like, you see the pickup in wildfires and other natural disasters around the United States, unfortunately every week now, it seems like. But this information is there, but it's not at the fingertips of all the folks in federal government, first responders, others that need it. And it's not to, any fault of their own. It's just, again, this is highly complex information. And some of the systems that are out there today are architected in a way that it doesn't make it easy for it to be discoverable in the other systems that people use every day. So a lot of like that particular National Space Council meeting is really focused on how can we better enable agencies and organizations across the US government to better share the information that's coming in commercially, right? All commercial, unclassified information that should be available to all. How do we make that more discoverable, disseminatable across the wider US government swath so that people can get value out of this in other applications that maybe it was never even intended for? Forestry management, we mentioned some maritime use cases and more of the military context, but a lot of that same information is super relevant for wildlife conservation and other types of things. Again, totally unrelated to maybe what some of the initial use cases are, but information is there and available. So I think the US government also wants to make sure that it's investing in things that are going to be widely used and leveraged, and they want to make sure that they're not going to procure the world's most expensive satellite whose data is only going to go to 3 users. So, they want to make sure that this is information that's usable by all for a variety of purposes.
I love it. I'm a big proponent of basic research and open data. So it's always exciting to see, if you can enable a community to get access to more data, how they're going to combine it, how they're going to use it in ways that you never thought of. Anthony, since this is the GraphGeeks podcast, can you explain a little bit about how graphs fit into or enable the overall solution?
Sure. So based on what Jesse was just saying, right, we're developing a platform or have developed a platform that allows you to corroborate signals to support an assessment that's going to lead you to a decision. And understanding what that corroboration process looks like, it's about understanding how one data item is related to another data item and what does that mean. And coming back to the democratization piece, we want to relieve the user of having to do that heavy lifting. And that's kind of what we built in the intelligence and the platform to do some of that, inference and connectivity in that way to provide the user with the summary or the synthesis, the MVP or the lowest common denominator synthesis of that information to support their decision making. And so understanding that a lot of data formats really hide how data is connected, and what graphs and knowledge graphs and connected data, what that really does is it's built to make sure that you understand how one piece is a part of a bigger whole and represented to the other pieces around it. And again, a lot of the magic about graphs and connected data, some of this stuff kind of comes out at you and you wouldn't necessarily see it. And so we wanted to make sure that we architected a system, understanding the problem and the scale that we were up against, to make sure that we had a system that was flexible, that was scalable, and that could provide the type of intelligence that was needed for this particular use case.
And did you build your own graph tech platform? Are you using graph visualization, a database? Like, if you can tell us, as much as you can tell us, like what types of graph and did you build that from scratch?
So we looked at AWS Neptune. We looked at, kind of some of the Neo4j Tinkerpop options and offerings out there. We spent a lot of time thinking about our data model. Like, what does our data look like? Because having been in graph at least, 10, 12 years now, I understand that the data model is kind of the linchpin. If you get that wrong, everything else kind of falls apart really, really quickly as you start to scale. And so just really understanding, trying to, as best as we could, 5, 10 years out, what does our data look like and how do we design a data model that scales? And so what we kind of landed on, Amy, was needing a hybrid approach where we actually built some things in-house to support the use cases, but also supporting some open source and some tooling available today. And so without going into more detail than that, just understanding how the data model that we came up with fit with today's offering without compromising the intelligence support that we needed, the data structure and the databases to enable, to allow us to provide the answers that we provide.
It's a not a surprising answer. Well, one, data models are always the toughest thing in graphs. And two is we see a lot of people using hybrid approaches, both, hybrid graph tech and actually building some of their own, and kind of this mix. I will say there's just no off-the-shelf, graph solution for for anything complex, and certainly if something as complex as the Earth data and all that you're pulling together. So it doesn't surprise me, and maybe someday you can give us a sneak peek as well. That would be awesome. But let's shift a little bit. You're using graphs and geospatial data together, but you don't usually say geospatial like on your website. I took a look, and there's not woefully not enough graph for my preference for on the website itself.
Yeah, I mean, to your point on how we're using some of the terminology, like we went through. We never wanted to put the words geospatial data on the website. It may have snuck in a few places. It's out of most of our decks and things like that, because again, like that's a type of information, right? And I think we can easily be pigeonholed into some of these areas because, some of our earliest customers and some earliest use case, they're very focused on imagery, but it's very, very like infrequent that someone is using any of our system for just finding a picture. Like there are definitely users that want to do that, but the vast majority and the whole purpose of the company is, what is the context? Like maybe you don't need that picture at all. Like what is the right mix of information to get you to what you need? And sometimes it's geospatial, but sometimes it's not. Like a tweet with a properly captured photo or video at the right time and location, that's what we consider more open source information, open source intelligence. But so anyway, I think because what we're trying to do obviously is much, much broader than the geospatial world, and specifically around graph. Like we tend to also get pigeonholed into a lot of like specific technologies where there's so much hype around language models and things like that. For example, everyone just thinks it's like, hey, these are just, someone taking OpenAI and putting a pretty UI on top of it, right? And those sorts of technologies don't work in this context, right? So you have to build a highly variable and complex infrastructure that uses a lot of different pieces of technology, all orchestrated into a workflow that's enabled by other software and things like that on top of it. But yeah, we don't tend to get deep into like, well, which LLM are we using or which graph are we using? Because to us, they're pieces of a bigger puzzle. And for our users, the type of users we're engaged with, that's not something that they're thinking about. They're always thinking about what are the types of questions that I can ask this system and get to the right mix of information out of it. And whether sometimes that's going to executing a very traditional lexical style search with no LLM, graph, nothing involved. It's just a really standard search interface, which you can use in any normal product. And some people are asking highly complicated questions like, I mentioned vessels before, but think something like, the latest Chinese fishing vessel activity in and around Taiwan. Like that's a very highly complex information or question that requires very multimodal information that has to go through a series of steps that involve many technologies versus I need a picture at this time. So anyway, that's why we've kind of been a bit, I would say, broader in some of our messaging.
It's an implementation detail that we feel distracts from the complex nature of what it takes to build the context that the users are after, right? Because to Jesse's point, people ask us, well, are you using LLMs and how are you using Gen AI? And we can say yes to those things, but those are distractions because there's no one thing that provides the complete solution. We've had to get really creative with how do we bring the best of graph, of knowledge discovery, of search, of data enrichment, LLMs, traditional machine learning approaches, NLP. We've had to bring to bear all of these things that it's really unfair to kind of say, well, do you use this one thing? Well, sure, but that doesn't give you the outcome that the users are after.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially technologists. We love to put things in boxes. And I think we like to put things in boxes so that we can then compare and contrast. So thinking about that compare and contrast, maybe Jesse, how do you contrast what Dante is doing to other similar solutions?
Sure. So, I mean, when I think about what Dante is doing in regard to, other types of solutions, I think, again, I've seen a lot of innovation in certain parts of the stack, like, for example, in the pure data side, right? I think there's some incredible companies making it easier to find and discover one particular modality of information. There's a lot of really interesting work on the, general data science and infrastructure perspective, that tied into a particular software domain vertical market domain. So I think some people have taken a lot of these bits of information, again, like just to be more specific, like in the agricultural market or insurance market or the defense and intelligence space, taking things from advancements in computer vision, advancements in data collection, higher, say on the visual side, right? Higher resolution, more frequent revisit combined with computer vision, but then tied into a really specific workflow. I think those are some really innovative things that are happening right now. But I think what we're really different at and what we do really, really well is trying to not go incredibly deep and custom into any one particular area, and really, again, stepping back and staying with the core root question and trying to figure out like what are the right mixes to get a human as close to the answer as they can. Maybe we don't, like I mentioned before in some of those really vertical market specific solutions, maybe we don't build 10, 15 step highly specialized workflows tailored to any one individual market, because there's always going to be an expert that knows how to do that better than us. But what we'll always want to be at the cutting edge of and in the forefront of is, well, what are maybe those 60, 70% more general use cases where we can get an unskilled or just, person trying to get a question answered to 80, 90% of the way, skip a lot of the computer vision and a lot of the other techniques, and let the human being, when presented with the right inputs, get to the key output incredibly fast. So hopefully that makes sense. But like that comes up a lot in our work where, we could spend years iterating on a highly custom workflow for a given market that assumes that you need to go to complete end answer for a given problem set. But we are really trying to innovate in how do we really, really fast in 80% of the cases, get a user almost there and allow the user to make that final leap, but saving them an enormous amount of time.
Do you have tools that help the analysts then, customize to get to 100%? Or is that a more of a handoff for the expert to then customize and other people to use? What does that point look like?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's really depends on the question. So like, for example, I mentioned a query about, Chinese fishing vessels, right? The end answer to their question may actually be 2 or 3 steps down the board, because they may be looking for one individual ship. And when they ask that broad question, they figured out the right individual ones that they care about, where then they can ask a subsequent question to go deeper and deeper. But in some cases, they may have a very generalized question, like how many of these ships exist, or how many tanker ships are parked off the coast of Fort Lauderdale right now. That's a really, really simplistic answer that, you can clearly just say 5 and here are their names. So it really depends on the question. So there are many questions that we like to facilitate where there's a really clear and concise answer where we can present that back. And there are others where there may be additional queries that march them down a workflow, but again, without having to use any highly specialized tools. And there are other use cases where we just definitely have folks that just egress out of the system and say, I've got my root inputs, but I need to go down and do a completely separate, more complex, specialized workflow. So again, to use the sort of geospatial tag, say someone's an imagery analyst, right? And they've now, instead of spending, half a day finding the right 7 images they need to really review and annotate and analyze, they've now found those in 10 seconds, but now they're going to move into their traditional specialized tools to really conduct that workflow. So maybe to just quickly summarize, right? If it's a really simple, easy to summarize thing, like we can provide those concrete answers. Sometimes it just requires a couple of subsequent queries, and then sometimes they just need to progress the platform to do more of that traditional expert workflow.
That makes sense. And if we kind of thinking about different types of users, Anthony, I know you have both commercial and public sector kind of, federal use cases and customers. Are there different considerations, either from a product standpoint or maybe the underlying architecture, that you have to look at or provide differently for commercial versus, public sector?
So I think as you go down the stack, Amy, a lot of the architecture is built in such a way that the use case is agnostic, right? At the end of the day, you're just trying to understand how data is related both to the user query, but how is data related to each other? And a lot of times that relationship is only known at query time, right? I don't know that, a ship and a picture are related, for example, until you tell me you want the ship and the picture at this location. They just happen to be in the same coordinate system. And so at the architecture level, it looks really the same. Then you start laying on top of that, well, what data is relevant for commercial or what data is relevant for federal or government use cases. And then that's where you can start some of the divergence begin. And then as you continue to go up, well, what queries are going to be relevant to commercial? What type of, inferences and what type of correlations are we going to need to make for commercial versus government use cases? And sometimes they can be similar, other times they can be quite divergent. But that all plays out in terms of the algorithms and how we go about responding to the queries, not necessarily fundamental architecture differences to support those use cases.
Yeah. Question that came to mind as you were talking about, and I was imagining like all of these crazy, maybe sometimes well conditioned queries, and sometimes maybe poorly formed queries that you may get. Do you actually learn from the queries that are coming in as well, and then able to incorporate either updating the quality of the response, or you know where I'm going with that one. Do you use that info? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we would be very, very poor stewards of the literature and technology history if we didn't take, what has been learned over the last 20, 30, even more years about how we further improve the experience based on what we can learn and gather from the user interaction and the user session. So whether it be, patterns of behavior, patterns of interest, sequences of interactions with the tool, we're using all of that to make sure that we can do a better job inferring what it is you're really after and really giving you that wow moment, because that's what it's after. I think we've been conditioned with kind of traditional web search. We can't really ask the thing, so we kind of ask proxy questions to get us closer to the thing. And now with LLMs, it really opened up, we don't have to go through those proxy questions anymore. We can go directly to the source, or we can ask the question directly and then the magic happens. And that's the type of experience we're trying to get with Dante. Like Jesse was saying, there are some questions where it's easier to do the magic because they're asking for an answer and we can provide that. Other times the magic looks like, wow, you gave me all the context I need to make the decision. I trust this, and then I can go on and do the rest of my workflow, versus having to go through those hours of kind of pre-question, then secondary pre-question, and then finally getting to the real question that you're after.
So you've mentioned the word magic a couple times there, and I'm gonna pivot to Jesse and say, what is the aha wow moment where a user or somebody you're demonstrating the Dante to, where they kind of, you can tell they have that thought, oh, this is magic. Like, I don't know how this is happening, but I want it. Like, what kind of moment does that usually happen in?
I remember a really specific scenario because we ended up putting a demo video in some of our marketing because of that particular query, but it was a very topical thing. If you remember when the Baltimore bridge collapsed that day, I think that afternoon, or I can't remember the exact timelines, but we were with a customer and someone was like, man, did you see what happened in the news today? And so this particular person was someone on sort of the natural disaster side, but they were just kind of looking and trying to understand what data has been captured there, because they were just kind of curious to see, the surrounding area. And I spun the computer around and we just typed in Baltimore bridge collapse into the search engine. And within, 5-10 seconds, they had electro-optical, synthetic aperture radar imagery. They had all the latest social media. They had a summarization, what happened. They had all of the other ships in port at the time, all of the other, ships just outside of port, and then a lot of just general local news information that quickly. And, they explained to me that just to find an image of the ship hitting the bridge, right, they would have had to go through probably 5-10 different systems to figure out who had a picture at the right time of exactly that bridge, but after the event took place without clouds so that you can actually see the ship, right? And that would have been like an afternoon endeavor for them. And just that alone, they got it in 5-10 seconds, plus all the other context around the situation that for them, like their question was answered. Like, I now have a complete breakdown of all of the relevant information related to this topic and stuff that is totally outside of my normal purview, right? So stuff that they wouldn't even have known existed at that time that maybe is now allowing them to kind of conduct further research that they need to do. But that was one of the first times where, we just live on the fly did something and, the user wasn't expecting that. And, they were able to do something that they didn't think was possible.
Very cool example. And it makes me think every news agency or investigative journalist and maybe investigative journalist should be using, something like a Dante, because, time is of the essence. And as you said, it's so hard to find right now, what you're looking at, where you're looking at, and all of that. So I'll pivot back to Anthony here, thinking I'm going to bring it back to graphs because that's what I do. You have a pretty impressive background. How have you seen graphs change over the years? And where do you kind of see the use of graph technology moving in the next few years?
So I think one of the big changes I'm happy about is seeing graph move away from kind of small toy problems. Look at this, small, less than business critical problem that I can throw graph at and it solves. And now graph really maturing to a place where, hey, this is a technology and a tool that we can use to solve problems at scale. So scale has always been an issue in distributed systems, and graph is no exception to the rule. But seeing more tools, more techniques to help bridge that gap and understand how do we bring graph to bear at scale and overcome some of these challenges that large-scale distributed systems provide. So that's one of the things that I'm really happy to see, because again, that was a problem. Fresh out of graduate school, I was kind of left scratching my head, like, once the graph doesn't fit in memory, what do you do? And that kind of was the point where you just kind of said, wow, this is hard. In terms of where I see graph going, I think if we can get back to kind of this data model and kind of ontology, and I know that can be a bad word to some people, but how do we support users with adopting graph? Because adopting graph is not trivial, because you really got to understand where all the landmines are way down the road and down the board before you even get started. Because once you decided upon a data model and you built your architecture around that, when you find out that data model no longer works or where it starts to break down, you can almost be paralyzed, and you've got to figure out, how do I best support an infrastructure that scales and that grows in the face of, your worldview of the data you care about, your worldview of how data is related to one another. Those things are going to grow and change. So what type of tooling and support infrastructure can we build as a graph community to help more users adopt this technology without having to have seen so many train wrecks to get to a place where you can build the thing correctly?
There's so much going on in this space to try to move us forward. And I actually am very excited to see a lot of, I think you might call it like graphs go underground. Like you're actually not hearing about the graph, very much like Dante. Anybody who wasn't thinking about it or didn't know more about you wouldn't know that there was a graph under the hood. I think that's actually a very positive sign. It says that we're kind of moving forward and making things more usable for people building solutions, and hopefully end users as well. So is there anything that you've learned, and maybe you've kind of already alluded to this, while building a solution on top of a graph, that you would want to share with our listeners as, maybe they're thinking about embedding a graph into an application that they have, or tips other than data model? Because we all know data model.
Yeah. I would just really lean into embracing a hybrid approach. Yes, graph is really powerful, but you can't be so tunnel vision that you lose sight of how you can build a fit for purpose solution where graph is a part of the system and not the system. Because, graph, we tend to be very, very excited and we can geek out on graph. And unfortunately, that can make you really close the aperture and really fail to see other ways or how to augment the graph to better serve the solution and the use case that you're building for. So that would be my advice is hybrid isn't a complete turn from graph, but graph is a part of a bigger solution and a bigger way that we can, a bigger stick that we can swing at the problem.
Nice. I love that. Thank you. And Jesse, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd want to make sure the listeners knew about, or a point you want them to remember?
I'm pretty excited about where the broader industry is going. I mean, from the machine learning, language model perspective, I think from a space, aerospace, sensing community, like all of these things are kind of hitting a point of maturity at a pretty similar time. So depending on the users or the listeners out there, for folks coming out of college all the way to, people in industry and professionals, I think this domain has enormous growth potential. And I think it's really cool to see some of these worlds colliding as well, right? Like I never thought in a million years, my background, I've been in the drone industry for a while as well, right? I never thought in a million years you'd have people conversationally using NLP and language models and graph technology, but with drone data, right? Like I just didn't think that those two worlds would ever collide. And I'm now seeing this in a number of different areas where you have all these different disciplines that are, what you used to think would be completely, orthogonal types of things now kind of happening at the same time and complementing each other. And I think that's really interesting. And I think, there's things that we're doing now that I didn't think were possible when we started a year ago. And so what's exciting also is that there's probably going to be something a year from now where we're like, oh man, I wish I knew about that now, or I wish that this thing existed now. Right? So when you see that kind of pace, anyway, it's pretty cool to see. So if folks are listening to this and they're thinking about getting into one of these industries, it's definitely a great time to do so.
And I have to agree. I am floored by the amount of change just in the graph space this year. And I can only imagine and postulate on, what it's going to look like in 6 months. It's quite exciting, fun, a little nerve-wracking. I'm like, where do you focus? Where do you spend your time? I would kind of add with what you said, Jesse, and just dive in and do it, because it'll probably be applicable somewhere, even if it's not in the exact direction you thought. So we'll probably should leave it there for today. But is there anything that people can do to follow up? So if they want to know a little bit more about Dante or some of the technologies you use or Earth data, where can they find you and how can they get started?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, folks can come to our website, just Dante, DANTI.ai. You can connect with us there. We've got generic emails and things like that you can send us a note or ask some questions. Also on our, LinkedIn and social accounts, things like that. We put out a lot of videos and some of the stuff we're doing. I think by the nature of our kind of early customers, given it's all government, there's not a ton. But we're also going to be rolling out more and more commercial offerings and things like that. And so those will be things where folks can just come and sign up. So I think next time you're going to go and maybe buy a house and you want to figure out, how old your roof is, or if it's in a flood zone or something like that, but you're not an expert in those areas, well, there'll be a way where you can just come type it into a search bar and find out. And so that'll be something for any user. But anyway, so those sorts of things, more to come. But yeah, definitely check out our website, check out some of our social channels, and look forward to engaging there.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you both. Very informative. I love hearing about how people are applying graphs to do really cool things. So appreciate you coming on and talking to us. For those listening, GraphGeeks.org, join the Discord server and follow us on YouTube for more videos and podcasts. Well, thank you again.
Thank you for having us, Amy.
Thank you.